Maggie J. And these are my stories.
Hey guys, want a cold drink? David flashed his brightest smile as he rolled down the window and addressed the construction workers. But the question was actually superfluous. It was hot today, and they probably wanted something cold to drink. The men paused their work and watched the stocky man climb out of the car. Carlos, the foreman, approached him. "You're not allowed to park here. It's a construction site. Please drive on." Unimpressed by his words, David held out his hand. Carlos took it more out of reflex than anything else. Firm handshake. "I'm David Newman. I worked in construction myself for 30 years, and I know how bad the hot days can be. That's why I've brought you some cold drinks." Carlos looked at him suspiciously. Nobody usually did that. Usually they just complained about the roadworks, which of course always had to be carried out during the vacation season. And as if Carlos and his colleagues could help it, the drivers took their frustration out on the construction workers. Honking their horns and swearing loudly, they drove past the closed-off sections far too fast and behaved as if they were late for an emergency operation and not just for dinner with their families. But the man standing in front of him looked at him with such a friendly and open smile that Carlos relaxed. Not everyone behaved like the honking and swearing idiots he usually encountered, and the proof was in front of him. "So, what do you think? I've got some ice-cold water and a couple of soft drinks." David opened the door of his back seat and pulled out a large cooler. Inside were several bottles, surrounded by ice cubes. Carlos smiled and called the worker. A cold drink would be just the thing right now. Smiling contentedly, David watched as the men took the bottles and had a relaxed chat. He straightened his baseball cap and chatted with Carlos about his old days on the building site. Of course, all of it was a lie. He had never worked on a building site. He had been an accountant. Not the most exciting job, but he'd paid the bills and been able to send his daughter to university. They never had much, but they had everything they needed. And most importantly, they had each other. After the death of his wife Celine, Molly's mother, they had grown even closer. He didn't know what he would do without Molly. David let his eyes wander over the building site. He nodded his head slightly, as if to say, "Looks good," then adjusted his cap again. It was hot today. The perfect day for his project. The men on the construction sites were thirsty. Almost all of them had accepted a drink from him so far. Those who didn't drink would be able to identify him and his car. But that didn't matter. David had no intention of getting out of this alive. On the passenger seat was a cooling box with his own special water. It contained 4 times the amount of cyanide needed to kill a cow. He had read on the internet that it would be quick. Fast was good. He couldn't bear the pain and grief raging through his body for much longer. He still couldn't believe how easy it had been to get hold of the stuff. He had had to empty his bank account for it, but he no longer needed the money, and there was no one he could have left it to. He hadn't mixed that much into the bottles he handed out. It was the perfect amount to kill the men, but they wouldn't die immediately. After 15 to 20 minutes, the first ones would get dizzy, and by the time the first ones passed out, he would be on his way to the next construction site. This was the 5th one he had visited so far. He would certainly manage a few more before someone recognized a pattern and sent out warnings. He couldn't avenge Molly with this. He knew that. Nothing could make up for what had happened to her and his unborn grandson in her womb. His heart clenched at the thought. It had been 4 months now, but it still felt as strong as the moment he received the call from the police. He had tried to move on after the funeral. He really had. He went to a support group, a therapist, and had also seen a psychiatrist when he felt like he was drowning in his grief. But the pills he was prescribed didn't help. Nothing helped to calm the raging storm inside him. The pills made him numb, but they didn't numb the part that he wanted more than anything. So be silent. His poor little girl. What pain she must have been in as she bled to death. Alone, without anyone in the car behind or in front of her, noticing what was happening to the young woman. It happened too quickly for that, as one of the doctors explained to him. David had seen that the doctor was lying to him. He hadn't been able to look him in the eye. The contractions had started suddenly. Far too early. She was only 33 weeks pregnant. Molly must have been scared, terrified. She had always been a fighter, and instead of calling the ambulance, she had gotten into the car. The hospital wasn't that far away, and she wasn't bleeding that badly yet. She must have realized too late that it wasn't just contractions, because she was already standing in a traffic jam that wasn't moving an inch. A traffic jam caused by a building site. A building site like this one. Tears welled up in David's eyes, but he quickly wiped them away. He didn't want the men around him to notice that something was wrong. First, he wanted to continue his journey and visit more construction sites. It was hot. They would drink. They were going to suffer. All together. Even if none of them were personally responsible. The building site where his little daughter bled to death and his grandson suffocated miserably inside her had been completed weeks ago. But he had to do something. He couldn't go on. This was the only way out. He smiled contentedly and adjusted his cap. Yes, today was the day his suffering would end.
Don't forget to like the video and leave a comment. I am looking forward to your feedback.